Hey guys, tonight we're descending into the suffocating darkness of ancient mines, where the only light comes from flickering oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on walls stained with human sweat and desperation. You can almost taste the metallic air, thick with dust that coats your lungs like a second skin, while the rhythmic pounding of hammers echoes through tunnels that stretch deeper than most people dare to imagine. Tonight, we're exploring the most brutal jobs in ancient times, occupations so dangerous that you probably won't survive your first month, let alone build a career. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before dawn in a cramped stone barracks, your body already aching from yesterday's labor. The Roman silver mines of Spain beckon, or rather, they demand your presence. You're not here by choice. Perhaps you're a slave captured in some distant war, or maybe you're a criminal whose only alternative to execution was a life sentence in these tunnels. Either way, you shuffle forward with dozens of other condemned souls, each carrying the same hollow expression of men who know they're walking toward their graves. The mine entrance yawns before you like the mouth of some primordial beast. Roman engineers were brilliantly efficient at extracting wealth from the earth, but they cared little for the human cost. You descend wooden ladders that creak ominously under the weight of so many bodies, deeper and deeper, until the morning sunlight becomes nothing more than a distant memory. The temperature drops, and dampness seeps through your threadbare tunic, chilling you to the bone. Your tools are primitive: a bronze pick, a wooden bucket, and if you're lucky, a small oil lamp that provides just enough light to see the rock face in front of you. The silver veins run through hard stone, requiring you to chip away for hours to extract even small amounts of precious metal. Your hands blister within the first hour, then bleed, then develop calluses so thick they feel like leather gloves permanently attached to your fingers. The dust is everywhere. It fills your nostrils, coats your throat, and settles in your lungs like fine sand. Ancient miners suffered from what we now know as silicosis, though they simply called it the cough that kills. You watch older miners, those who have somehow survived more than a year, hack up blood-tinged sputum, their faces gaunt and their breathing labored. They're living reminders of your future, assuming you live long enough to develop the same symptoms. Water seeps constantly through the rock, creating treacherous footing and requiring constant pumping to prevent flooding. You take turns operating the primitive pumps, a back-breaking task that involves hauling on ropes and levers for hours at a time. When the pumps fail, and they often do, entire sections of the mine flood, trapping workers in air pockets where they slowly suffocate or drown. Historians still argue whether Roman mining operations were as systematically brutal as later accounts suggest, but archaeological evidence tells a grim story. Skeletal remains found in ancient mine shafts show signs of severe malnutrition, broken bones that healed poorly, and lung damage consistent with prolonged dust exposure. The average lifespan of a mine worker was estimated at just 6 months to 2 years, depending on the type of ore being extracted. You learn to navigate by touch in the deeper tunnels, where even oil lamps struggle against the oppressive darkness. The sound of your own breathing becomes amplified, echoing off narrow walls that seem to press closer with each passing hour. Cave-ins are a constant threat. You hear the warning groans of stressed timber supports and learn to recognize the subtle shifts in air pressure that signal impending collapse. The workday stretches from dawn to dusk, with only brief breaks for watery gruel and stale bread. Guards patrol the tunnels, armed with whips and clubs to discourage any thoughts of rest or rebellion. Escape is virtually impossible. Even if you could navigate the maze of tunnels in darkness, armed sentries wait at every entrance. Besides, where would you go? Most mines were located in remote areas, far from civilization, surrounded by hostile terrain that would kill you just as surely as the mine itself. Your fellow workers become your only source of human connection in this underground hell. You share whispered conversations during brief rest periods, trading stories of the lives you once knew or dreams of freedom that grow dimmer each day. Some men go mad from the isolation and darkness, talking to imaginary companions or claiming to see visions in the flickering lamplight. Others simply stop eating, choosing a quicker death over prolonged suffering. Sleep comes fitfully in the barracks, where dozens of exhausted bodies crowd together on straw mattresses that smell of sweat and despair. You dream of sunlight and fresh air, but morning always arrives too soon, dragging you back to the tunnels, where silver gleams like trapped starlight in veins of stone that will likely become your tomb. You emerge from the mines, only to find yourself in an equally terrifying profession, cleaning the blood-soaked sands of Roman amphitheaters. The Colosseum looms above you in the pre-dawn darkness, its massive stone walls still echoing with yesterday's screams and the roar of 50,000 spectators who witnessed human beings torn apart for entertainment. Now, in the quiet hours before the next day's games, you and your crew of fellow unfortunates must prepare this killing floor for fresh carnage. The arena sand, mixed with sawdust and lime to absorb blood, has been churned into a crimson paste by the previous day's gladiatorial contests. You rake through this grisly mixture, searching for fragments of bone, teeth, and pieces of armor that the crowd missed during their frenzied cheering. The metallic smell of dried blood mingles with the acrid scent of animal waste and human fear, a combination so overwhelming that new workers often vomit their first morning on the job. Your tools are simple but essential: wooden rakes, bronze shovels, and large wicker baskets for collecting the debris of death. You work by torchlight, creating long shadows that dance across the arena floor like the ghosts of yesterday's victims. The silence is almost more unnerving than the crowds would be. Every scrape of your rake sounds unnaturally loud. Every whispered conversation between workers carries across the empty space with startling clarity. Beneath your feet, the hypogeum stretches out in a complex network of tunnels, chambers, and elevator systems. This underground maze housed the gladiators, wild animals, and stage machinery that made the games possible. Even now, hours after the last contest, you can hear the restless pacing of lions and tigers in their cages, the occasional roar or snarl that reminds you that death stalks these tunnels on 4 legs as well as 2. The worst part of your job isn't the blood or the smell, it's the human remains you occasionally discover. A severed finger here, a piece of scalp there, sometimes an entire limb that the arena slaves missed in yesterday's cleanup. You've learned to work mechanically, treating these fragments like any other debris, because the alternative is madness. Your supervisor, a grizzled veteran who claims to have cleaned after gladiatorial games for 15 years, jokes darkly that he's swept up more Romans than most generals have killed. His humor is as black as the dried blood under his fingernails. Roman records indicate that major amphitheaters hosted games up to 200 days per year, meaning your gruesome work is nearly constant. Between gladiatorial combats, animal hunts, public executions, and elaborate staged naval battles that flood the arena floor, there's always fresh carnage to clean. You become intimately familiar with the different types of bloodstains. Arterial spray creates distinctive patterns, while pooled blood from mortal wounds leaves dark circles in the sand that require special attention. The animals present their own challenges. Bears, leopards, and exotic creatures from across the empire leave behind massive amounts of waste, fur, and sometimes the remains of condemned criminals who faced them in staged hunts. You shovel elephant dung that weighs more than you do, and carefully navigate around the carcasses of big cats that died fighting each other for the crowd's amusement. Historians still argue whether the famous account of thousands of animals being slaughtered in a single day's games is accurate, but your aching back suggests the numbers weren't exaggerated. Between games, you help maintain the complex machinery that brings death to the arena floor. Trapdoors that spring open to release hungry lions, elevators that lift gladiators from the hypogeum, and the sophisticated drainage system that can flood the entire arena for naval battles. All of this requires constant cleaning and maintenance. You oil pulleys with hands still stained from scraping up human remains, and you replace broken chains that might have held a criminal destined for execution by wild beasts. Your fellow workers are a mix of slaves, condemned criminals serving short sentences, and free men so desperate for work that they'll take any job, no matter how degrading. The conversations during break times are surreal, discussing whether the afternoon's lion feeding will be messier than usual, or debating the best techniques for removing brain matter from arena sand. You develop a gallows humor that would horrify normal people, because without it, the psychological weight of your work would crush you completely. The crowds never see you or think about you, but their entertainment depends entirely on your gruesome labor. Every cheer they make, every bet they place, every moment of thrilled excitement they experience is built on your willingness to wade through the aftermath of systematic human slaughter. You are the invisible foundation of Rome's bloodiest spectacle, the person who makes it possible for civilizations most brutal entertainment to continue, day after day, year after year. As dawn approaches and the first spectators begin gathering outside, you make your final sweep of the arena floor. Fresh sand is spread, covering the evidence of your night's work. Soon, new gladiators will emerge from the tunnels below. New victims will face the beasts, and new blood will soak into the sand you've just cleaned. Tomorrow night, you'll be back with your rake and shovel, preparing to sweep up another day's worth of human tragedy. You descend even deeper now, into the bowels of Roman civilization, where the greatest engineering marvel of the ancient world takes shape around you. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, stretches through the darkness, like the digestive system of some massive stone creature, and you're crawling through its intestines with nothing but a flickering torch and a desperate hope that today won't be your last. The tunnel walls weep with moisture that you try not to identify, and the air is so thick with noxious gases that breathing becomes a conscious effort rather than an automatic function. Your job is to carve these channels through solid rock and clay, creating the underground arteries that will carry away the waste of 1,000,000 Romans. It's noble work in theory, the foundation of public health and urban civilization. But in practice, it means spending your days in cramped tunnels where hydrogen sulfide and methane gas can kill you without warning. You've seen workers collapse mid-swing, their pickaxes clattering to the stone floor as they succumb to invisible poisons that accumulate in low-lying areas. The engineering challenges are staggering. You must maintain precise gradients to ensure proper flow, calculate angles that will prevent stagnation, and build stone arches strong enough to support the weight of entire city blocks above your head. Roman engineers were mathematical geniuses, but they weren't the ones crawling through spaces barely wide enough for a human body, chiseling channels that had to be perfect, or the entire system would fail. Water is both your enemy and your salvation. Groundwater seeps constantly through the tunnel walls, turning your work area into a mud pit that makes every step treacherous. Yet you also depend on this water to flush away the gases that would otherwise suffocate you, and to wash the accumulated filth from your work surfaces. You learn to read the subtle changes in water flow that signal structural problems or impending cave-ins. Your tools are primitive but effective: bronze chisels, wooden mallets, rope and pulley systems for hauling stone blocks, and primitive oil lamps that provide barely enough light to see your immediate work area. The stone you're cutting is often harder than your tools, requiring endless sharpening and replacement. Your hands develop permanent scars from where chisels have slipped in the dim light, gouging flesh instead of stone. The work teams are organized with military precision because coordination is essential for survival. You work in groups of 6 to 8 men, with one person always stationed near the entrance to watch for gas buildup or tunnel collapse. Communication happens through a system of rope signals and whispered commands, because loud noises can bring down unstable ceiling sections that have been weakening for days. Death comes in many forms down here. Cave-ins are the most obvious threat, You hear the warning creaks and groans of stressed stone. See the small pebbles that rain down before major collapses, and learn to recognize the subtle shifts in air pressure that mean you have seconds to evacuate. But the invisible killers are worse. Carbon monoxide from your oil lamps accumulating in dead air pockets. Hydrogen sulfide from decomposing organic matter. And methane gas that can explode with devastating force if it encounters an open flame. The Romans understood disease transmission better than most ancient civilizations, but they didn't fully grasp the microbiology of sewage. You work in an environment teeming with bacteria, parasites, and pathogens that cause dysentery, cholera, and typhoid fever. Your clothes become permanently stained with substances that would horrify modern health inspectors, and your skin develops a variety of rashes and infections from constant exposure to contaminated water. Historians still argue whether the Cloaca Maxima was as revolutionary as Roman writers claimed, but archaeological evidence suggests it was a genuine marvel of engineering that served the city for over 1,000 years. The system you're building will outlast the empire itself, continuing to function long after the civilization that created it has crumbled to dust. Your workday begins before dawn and extends well into the night, because construction must continue around the clock to meet impossible deadlines. Roman project managers were notorious for their demanding schedules, and delays often resulted in brutal punishments for the entire work crew. You snatch brief meals of bread and watered wine in tunnel alcoves, trying to eat quickly before the smell of sewage overwhelms your appetite. The psychological toll is as severe as the physical dangers. Spending months in underground darkness, surrounded by human waste and the constant threat of death, drives some workers to madness. You witness grown men break down crying or begin talking to themselves in languages that might not even be real. Others become obsessively focused on their work, chiseling stone with mechanical precision while their minds retreat to some safer place. Yet there's also strange pride in this work. You're creating something that will improve the lives of countless Romans, making possible the dense urban population that defines imperial civilization. Every tunnel you carve, every arch you build, every precise gradient you calculate brings the great city closer to its destiny as the center of the known world. You may die in these tunnels, but your work will echo through history. You emerge from the Roman sewers, only to find yourself transported across the Mediterranean to an even more punishing landscape, the Giza Plateau under the blazing Egyptian sun, where limestone blocks weighing as much as 15 men await your aching muscles. The Great Pyramid rises before you like a geometric mountain, its smooth limestone facing reflecting sunlight with such intensity that looking directly at it can blind you. You squint through the heat shimmer, watching teams of workers drag massive stones up wooden ramps that zigzag up the pyramid's sides like scars on the face of a stone giant. Your day begins before dawn, when the desert air still holds a trace of coolness from the night. You stumble from your mud brick barracks, joints protesting after yesterday's labor, and join the river of humanity flowing toward the pyramid construction site. Thousands of workers converge on this monument to divine kingship, each person playing a specialized role in humanity's most ambitious construction project. The stones you'll move today were quarried from limestone beds along the Nile, then transported by barge to the pyramid site. Each block weighs between 2 and 15 tons. Imagine trying to move a modern car using nothing but ropes, wooden rollers, and human muscle power. You're part of a 20-man team assigned to a single block, and your success depends entirely on perfect coordination and timing. The ropes are your lifeline and your torment. Made from twisted papyrus fibers and animal sinew, they're strong enough to bear the weight of stone, but rough enough to tear the skin from your palms within hours. You wrap your hands in strips of linen that quickly become stained with blood and sweat, but the protection is minimal. By noon, your palms are raw meat, and by evening, you can barely grip the ropes that tomorrow will demand your complete strength. Egyptian engineers were mathematical wizards who calculated precise angles, load distributions, and structural tolerances that still impress modern architects. But they weren't the ones hauling stones up ramps, inclined at angles that push human endurance beyond its limits. You lean into your rope until your body is nearly horizontal, feet scrambling for purchase on wooden planks slick with sweat and sand. Heat is merciless. The Egyptian sun doesn't just warm the air, it turns the entire construction site into a furnace where metal tools become too hot to touch, and stone surfaces can burn exposed skin. You work in shifts, with mandatory rest periods during the hottest part of the day. But even in shade, the temperature hovers around levels that would be considered dangerous by modern occupational safety standards. Water becomes more precious than gold. Overseers constantly patrol with ceramic jugs, doling out carefully measured rations to prevent dehydration. But it's never enough. You learn to conserve every drop, holding water in your mouth for long seconds before swallowing, trying to maximize the cooling effect on your parched throat. Salt cakes on your skin as sweat evaporates instantly in the dry air, leaving white residue that makes you look like a living statue. The ramps are engineering marvels in themselves, massive wooden structures that spiral around the pyramid, allowing teams to haul stones to ever-increasing heights. But they're also death traps, where a single misstep can send you tumbling hundreds of feet to the desert floor below. You watch your footing obsessively, aware that the wooden planks are slick with oil used to reduce friction, and that a stumble while hauling a multi-ton block would likely drag several teammates to their deaths. Historians still argue whether pyramid construction relied primarily on slave labor or free workers motivated by religious devotion and steady wages. But the physical evidence is unambiguous. Someone had to move those stones, and it required backbreaking human effort on an unprecedented scale. Recent archaeological discoveries suggest that pyramid workers received better food and medical care than typical laborers. But even the best ancient medicine couldn't prevent the chronic injuries that come from years of heavy lifting. Your team develops its own rhythm and communication system. Hand signals replace shouted commands when the work requires absolute precision, and you learn to read the subtle body language that indicates when someone is approaching their physical limit. Teamwork isn't just about efficiency, it's about survival, because a single person collapsing under load can create a chain reaction that crushes multiple workers. The limestone dust is everywhere, coating your lungs and settling in your eyes until everything takes on a white, chalky haze. You develop a chronic cough that never quite goes away, and your tears leave clean tracks down your dust-caked cheeks. The stone particles work their way into every fold of your clothing, every pore of your skin, until you feel like you're slowly transforming into the same material you're hauling. Rest periods become sacred intervals where you collapse in whatever shade you can find, too exhausted to speak, but grateful for any respite from the brutal labor. You share watered beer and flat bread with your teammates, building the bonds of shared suffering that make the work bearable. These men become your brothers in ways that go deeper than blood, united by the common understanding that today's survival depends on yesterday's teamwork. The pyramid grows almost imperceptibly, each day's progress measured in single courses of stone that represent the combined effort of thousands of workers. You won't live to see it completed, but you're creating something that will endure for millennia, a monument so perfect in its proportions that it will inspire wonder and mystery for countless generations. Your sweat and blood are literally built into its foundations. You leave the desert heat for the salt spray of ancient harbors, where massive merchant vessels and warships come to die in your capable but unfortunate hands. The Mediterranean coastline stretches before you, littered with the wooden skeletons of ships that once carried Roman legions to distant conquests or brought exotic cargo from the edges of the known world. Now these maritime giants rest on sandy beaches like beached whales, and your job is to tear them apart piece by piece, salvaging valuable materials while risking your life with every swing of your bronze axe. The ships that arrive for breaking are often battle-damaged hulks, their oak hulls pierced by enemy rams or weakened by storms that would have sent them to the bottom if not for desperate repairs. You clamber across tilted decks that groan ominously under your weight, examining the massive timbers that will need to be cut apart and hauled away. Some vessels are so large that breaking them down will take months of dangerous work. Your tools are primitive, but effective for their purpose. Bronze axes that chip and dull against hardened oak, wooden wedges for splitting large timbers, and rope and pulley systems for moving heavy pieces. The bronze holds an edge poorly compared to modern steel, requiring constant sharpening on whetstones that you carry in leather pouches. Your axe becomes an extension of your body, its weight and balance as familiar as your own heartbeat. The work begins with stripping valuable fittings, bronze nails, iron reinforcements, decorative carvings, and anything else that can be sold or reused. You crawl through cargo holds that still smell of exotic spices, wine, or olive oil, searching for hidden compartments where merchants might have concealed valuable items. Sometimes you discover fascinating artifacts, coins from distant lands, religious statues, or personal belongings that tell stories of the ship's final voyage. The real danger comes when you start attacking the ship's structure. Oak timbers that have been seasoned by salt water become incredibly hard, requiring tremendous force to cut or split. Your muscles strain against wood that seems to resist every blow, and the constant jarring impact travels up your arms until your shoulders ache with a deep, persistent pain. Splinters fly with every axe strike, and you learn to squint reflexively to protect your eyes. Ship construction in ancient times relied on complex joinery techniques, mortise and tenon joints, wooden pegs, and lead sheathing that protected hulls from marine borers. Dismantling these connections requires both brute force and careful precision, because damaging valuable timber reduces its resale value. You become an expert in reading wood grain, understanding how ancient shipwrights thought, and predicting where joints will separate cleanly versus where they'll require extensive cutting. Lead sheathing presents its own hazards. Romans used thin lead sheets to protect ship hulls from shipworms and other marine pests, but removing this material exposes you to toxic metal dust that accumulates in your lungs and bloodstream. You don't understand the long-term health effects. That knowledge won't exist for another 2,000 years. But you notice that veteran shipbreakers often develop tremors, memory problems, and other symptoms that we now recognize as lead poisoning. Fire is both your ally and your greatest fear. Controlled burning can weaken large timber joints that would otherwise require days of cutting. But ship wood is often impregnated with pitch, tar, and oil that can ignite explosively. You've seen entire hulks consumed by flames that started as small, controlled fires, destroying valuable materials, and sometimes trapping workers who couldn't escape quickly enough. The work is seasonal, following the rhythms of maritime trade and naval warfare. Spring brings ships damaged during winter storms, while autumn delivers vessels that survived the summer campaign season but suffered too much damage to remain seaworthy. During peak periods, your crew works from dawn to dusk, racing to process ships before weather makes the work impossible. Historians still argue whether ancient shipbuilding techniques were as sophisticated as modern analysis suggests. But the evidence is literally in your hands as you dismantle vessels that sailed thousands of miles and survived decades of service. The quality of craftsmanship you encounter daily would impress modern shipwrights, and the sheer size of some vessels challenges assumptions about ancient maritime capabilities. Your crew becomes a tight-knit family united by shared dangers and the specialized knowledge required for this work. You develop your own vocabulary for describing different types of wood joints, your own techniques for safely dismantling complex structures, and your own rituals for honoring the ships you're destroying. There's something almost sacred about taking apart vessels that carried human dreams and ambitions across dangerous waters. The physical toll is severe and cumulative. Years of swinging heavy axes against resistant wood destroys your joints, while constant exposure to salt air, wood dust, and toxic metals undermines your overall health. Your hands become gnarled claws, permanently shaped around axe handles, and your back develops the characteristic stoop of someone who spent too many years hunched over difficult work. Yet there's satisfaction in this destruction. Every ship you break provides materials for new construction, seasoned oak timbers for buildings, bronze fittings for tools and weapons, lead for pipes and waterproofing. You're not just destroying, you're participating in an ancient form of recycling that ensures valuable materials continue serving human needs long after their original purpose has ended. You trade the maritime graveyard for the execution ground, where justice takes its most final form, and you play a supporting role in society's ultimate theater. The town square spreads before you in the gray pre-dawn light, cobblestones still damp with dew that will soon be stained with blood. A wooden platform dominates the center of the space, its surface scarred by countless previous performances, and you busy yourself with the grim preparations that make public execution possible. Your official title might be assistant to the public executioner, but the reality is that you're a combination of stage manager, prop master, and cleanup crew for society's most brutal entertainment. The executioner himself is a skilled professional, often hooded to protect his identity, who commands respect and fear in equal measure. You're his shadow, handling the dozens of practical details that ensure each execution proceeds smoothly and provides the crowd with the spectacle they've come to witness. The condemned prisoners arrive in a wooden cart, their hands bound behind their backs and their faces showing the full spectrum of human emotion confronting mortality. Some pray loudly, calling on whatever gods they worship for forgiveness or salvation. Others maintain stoic silence, perhaps hoping to deny the crowd the satisfaction of seeing them break. A few rage against their fate, cursing judges, witnesses, and the society that's about to kill them. Your first task is crowd control preparation. You help erect wooden barriers that will channel the spectators into organized groups, ensuring everyone has a clear view while preventing the mob from interfering with the proceedings. Public executions are social events that draw hundreds or sometimes thousands of people, from respectable merchants to street children who slip through gaps in the crowd to get closer to the action. The tools of execution vary depending on the crime and local customs. Beheading requires a sharp axe or sword, kept razor keen through careful maintenance. You spend hours sharpening the blade, testing its edge on pieces of wood, and ensuring the handle is securely attached. A dull blade or loose handle can turn a quick, clean death into a prolonged horror that enrages the crowd and traumatizes everyone present. Hanging presents different challenges. You must inspect the rope carefully, checking for weak spots that might cause it to break under the condemned person's weight. The noose requires specific knotting techniques that ensure quick unconsciousness rather than slow strangulation. You calculate the drop distance based on the person's weight and height too short, and they strangle slowly too long, and you risk decapitation that shocks even bloodthirsty crowds. The psychological preparation is as important as the physical arrangements. You help the condemned write final letters, arrange for last visits from family members, and sometimes assist with final religious rituals. These moments of human connection make your job emotionally devastating because you're simultaneously showing compassion and preparing someone for death. Crowds expect certain ceremonial elements that you must coordinate. The reading of the death warrant, the prisoner's opportunity for final words, the precise timing that builds dramatic tension without losing the audience's attention. You've learned to read crowd moods when they're becoming restless, when they're ready for the climactic moment, when delays might turn their bloodlust into anger directed at you and the executioner. The actual moment of execution happens quickly, but your work continues long afterward. Bodies must be removed, blood must be cleaned from the platform, and equipment must be maintained for the next performance. You develop a mechanical efficiency for these tasks, treating human remains like any other cleanup job, because the alternative is psychological breakdown. Historians still argue whether public executions served as effective deterrents to crime, but there's no doubt they provided entertainment for populations with limited recreational options. Your job exists at the intersection of justice, entertainment, and social control, making you complicit in a system that uses death as both punishment and public spectacle. The executioner himself is often a surprisingly thoughtful person, someone who takes pride in providing quick, clean deaths and minimizing suffering. You learn from him the technical aspects of killing efficiently, but also the philosophical questions that surround taking human life in the name of justice. These conversations happen quietly, away from crowds who prefer to see executioners as monsters rather than craftsmen. Your social position is peculiar and isolating. People need your services, but don't want to associate with you personally. You're simultaneously essential to the community and excluded from normal social relationships. Tavern keepers serve you reluctantly. Merchants charge you higher prices, and potential romantic partners often flee when they learn how you earn your living. The work follows judicial calendars and the seasonal rhythms of crime and punishment. Spring brings trials for crimes committed during winter's desperation, while autumn clears the dockets before winter makes travel difficult for judges and witnesses. Some days you preside over single executions, while others require processing multiple condemned prisoners in efficient succession. You witness humanity at its most extreme moments, the courage of people facing unjust sentences, the breakdown of those who finally understand their fate, the complex grief of family members torn between love and shame. These experiences change you in ways that normal people can't understand, creating a psychological burden that you carry alone. You leave the execution ground for an even grimmer calling, collecting the victims of medieval plague outbreaks, where death moves faster than any executioner's blade, and your wagon becomes a hearse for an entire civilization. The narrow streets of a plague-stricken city stretch before you like corridors in a nightmare, lined with houses marked by crude crosses that indicate infected residents within. The smell hits you first, a sweet, cloying stench of decomposition mixed with the acrid smoke of burning possessions that follows plague carts through urban landscapes turned into open-air morgues. Your cart is a crude but essential piece of technology. Wooden wheels reinforced with iron bands, a flat bed large enough to stack dozens of bodies, and long handles that allow you to maintain some distance from your grisly cargo. The wheels creak ominously under their burden, creating a distinctive sound that sends healthy people scurrying into their homes and barricading their doors. You've become the walking embodiment of mortality, a figure so associated with death that even seeing you from a distance can trigger panic. The bodies you collect tell the story of plague's indiscriminate hunger. Wealthy merchants lie tangled with street beggars, their expensive clothes offering no protection against disease that kills regardless of social status. Children who were playing in these same streets just days ago now rest beside their parents in the back of your cart, their small faces peaceful in death, even as their families' entire bloodlines end with them. Your tools are simple, but essential for survival. Long wooden hooks for moving bodies without direct contact, leather gloves that you hope provide some protection against contagion, and strips of cloth soaked in vinegar that you tie around your face in a futile attempt to filter the air you breathe. Medieval understanding of disease transmission is limited and often wrong, but even ignorance can't completely obscure the obvious connection between proximity to plague victims and your own likelihood of infection. The work requires entering homes where entire families have died, sometimes days or weeks earlier. You push open doors to find tableaus of interrupted life, meals half-eaten on tables, children's toys scattered on floors, love letters begun but never finished. The silence in these houses is absolute and unnerving, broken only by the sound of your footsteps and the occasional crash as you knock over furniture while maneuvering bodies through narrow doorways. House calls follow a grim routine. You announce yourself loudly before entering, both to warn any survivors inside and to give yourself a moment to prepare psychologically for what you'll find. Plague kills in different ways. Some victims die quickly from pneumonic plague that floods their lungs with blood, while others suffer for days with the bubonic form that causes lymph nodes to swell into painful masses called buboes. The bodies you collect are in various stages of decomposition, depending on how long they've been dead and the season when they died. Summer heat accelerates decay, turning your cart into a mobile horror show that attracts clouds of flies and sends people fleeing in all directions. Winter cold preserves corpses, but makes them rigid and difficult to handle, requiring you to wrestle with frozen limbs and torsos that don't bend naturally. Transportation to burial sites, usually massive pits dug outside city walls, becomes a logistical nightmare complicated by panicked populations and overwhelmed infrastructure. Your route through the city must avoid main thoroughfares, where crowds might riot at the sight of so many corpses. But the narrow back alleys often become impassable when your cart's wheels sink into mud mixed with human waste and decomposition fluids. The mass graves you fill are engineering projects that would challenge modern equipment. Medieval grave diggers work around the clock, excavating pits large enough to hold hundreds of bodies, while trying to maintain some semblance of dignity for the dead. You help arrange corpses in layers, sometimes wrapping them in shrouds when materials are available, but more often simply stacking them like cordwood when the death rate exceeds all preparation. Historians still argue whether medieval plague outbreaks killed 1/3 or 1/2 of Europe's population, but your daily experience suggests the higher estimates might be conservative. Entire neighborhoods become ghost towns within weeks, and you sometimes spend entire days collecting bodies without encountering a single living person. The scale of mortality defies human comprehension and challenges your ability to maintain psychological stability. Your own survival becomes a daily miracle that you can't explain or predict. Some plague collectors work for months without becoming infected, while others die within days of starting the job. You develop superstitions and rituals that probably have no medical value, but provide psychological comfort, specific prayers, lucky charms, or dietary restrictions that create the illusion of control over your fate. The social isolation is as devastating as the physical danger. You're simultaneously essential to public health and completely shunned by everyone who remains alive. No one will share meals with you, speak to you unnecessarily, or allow you into their homes. You exist in a liminal space between the living and the dead, trusted by neither and welcomed by none. Payment for this work varies from city to city, sometimes in coins that might themselves carry infection, sometimes in food or shelter that desperate authorities provide to keep essential services functioning. More often, you work because someone must, and because stopping would mean watching corpses pile up in the streets until they create even worse health hazards for survivors. The psychological toll accumulates like physical poison. You handle so many dead children that you stop counting, witness so much family tragedy that grief becomes a constant background emotion, and see so much evidence of life's fragility that normal concerns seem trivial. Some collectors go mad, talking to the corpses they carry or claiming to receive messages from the dead. Yet there's also profound meaning in this terrible work. You're one of the last people to show respect for plague victims, ensuring they receive some form of burial rather than rotting in the streets like animals. Your labor maintains the thin veneer of civilization that separates human society from complete collapse, making survival possible for those fortunate enough to avoid infection. You descend from plague-ravaged streets into the crystalline underworld of salt mines, where death comes not from disease, but from the slow accumulation of mineral dust in your lungs, and the constant threat of tunnel collapse in chambers that stretch for miles beneath the earth. The Wieliczka mines of Poland sprawl around you like an underground city carved from solid rock salt, their tunnels lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on walls that gleam like captured starlight. Salt was more valuable than gold in many ancient economies, driving exploration and conquest across continents, and creating trade routes that connected distant civilizations. But extracting this precious mineral requires human labor in conditions that make surface mining look like pleasant gardening work. You swing your bronze pick against salt formations that are harder than limestone, sending crystalline fragments flying with each impact, while breathing air thick with particles that coat your lungs like snow. The mine shafts descend hundreds of feet below ground level, accessed by wooden ladders that creak ominously under the weight of workers carrying tools and supplies. The descent takes nearly an hour of careful climbing, and by the time you reach your assigned work face, your muscles are already tired from navigating the precarious wooden rungs that separate you from a fatal fall into darkness. Your tools are specialized for salt extraction, picks with bronze heads designed to chip away crystalline formations, wooden shovels for loading broken salt into leather bags, and primitive oil lamps that provide barely enough light to see your immediate work area. The salt dulls your tools quickly, requiring constant sharpening on whetstones that you carry in leather pouches alongside your meager food rations. The work environment is simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. Salt formations create natural sculptures that rival the finest artwork pillars that stretch from floor to ceiling, delicate crystal formations that sparkle in lamplight, and chambers so vast that your voice echoes for several seconds when you call out to fellow workers. But this beauty masks deadly hazards that kill workers regularly and without warning. Cave-ins are the most obvious threat. Salt formations can appear solid while actually being undermined by water infiltration or structural stress from mining activities elsewhere in the complex. You learn to recognize the subtle sounds that indicate imminent collapse, the soft whisper of falling salt crystals, the creaking of stressed support timbers, and the change in air pressure that precedes major structural failures. Water presents a constant challenge in salt mines. Groundwater infiltration can dissolve salt formations rapidly, creating voids that weaken entire sections of the mine. You work in perpetual dampness that makes footing treacherous and creates slick surfaces where a single misstep can send you tumbling into pits, or against sharp crystalline formations that can slice through clothing and skin. The air quality deteriorates rapidly in deep salt mines. Oil lamps consume oxygen while producing carbon monoxide, and the fine salt dust that fills the air with every pick strike gradually accumulates in your lungs. You develop a chronic cough within weeks of starting work, and veteran miners often struggle to breathe even during rest periods, their lungs permanently damaged by years of inhaling crystalline particles. Salt mining requires precise technique to extract valuable crystals without destroying them through careless tool work. You learn to read salt formations like other craftsmen read wood grain, understanding where natural fracture lines will allow clean separation, and where force will only create worthless fragments. This skill develops over months of practice, and miners who master it become valuable specialists worth higher wages. The mine's economy operates on multiple levels. Pure salt commands premium prices for food preservation and religious ceremonies, while lower grade material serves industrial purposes like leather tanning and textile dyeing. You learn to sort your output carefully because the difference between high grade and low grade salt can significantly affect your daily earnings. Historians still argue whether medieval salt mining operations were as extensive as surviving records suggest, but archaeological evidence supports claims of massive underground complexes that employed thousands of workers and produced salt for international trade. The Wieliczka mines operated continuously for over 700 years, suggesting that despite the dangers, the economic rewards justified the human costs. Your work shifts last from dawn to dusk, with brief breaks for meals of bread and watered wine that help wash salt dust from your throat. The constant labor in cramped conditions destroys your posture, creating the characteristic hunched appearance of career miners who have spent years bent over in low tunnels, chipping away at salt formations. The social structure in salt mines reflects broader medieval hierarchies. Skilled miners who can extract premium crystals earn higher wages and better working conditions, while unskilled laborers handle the dangerous tasks of hauling materials and maintaining tunnel supports. Your position in this hierarchy determines not just your income, but your likelihood of survival. Underground communities develop their own cultures and traditions. You share meals with fellow miners in excavated chambers that serve as rest areas, trading stories of surface life that seem increasingly distant as months pass in the mines. Some workers spend so much time underground that they develop a form of light sensitivity that makes surface work impossible. The constant threat of death creates intense bonds between mining crews. You learn to trust your teammates completely because your survival often depends on their alertness and quick response to danger. These relationships become more important than family connections, forged in conditions where a moment's inattention can kill multiple people simultaneously. You emerge from the crystalline underworld into a different kind of hell, the medieval tannery, where animal hides become leather through processes so revolting that even hardened warriors avoid walking downwind of your workplace. The stench hits you first, a complex bouquet of decomposition, fermented urine, and chemical reactions that can make strong men vomit from 100 yards away. You wade through this olfactory nightmare daily, transforming raw animal skins into the leather that medieval society desperately needs for clothing, armor, and countless essential items. Your workplace resembles a combination of slaughterhouse, chemical plant, and medieval laboratory. Wooden vats filled with various solutions line the work area, some containing lime water for removing hair, others filled with fermenting bark extracts for tanning, and the worst ones containing human and animal urine that's been aging for weeks to achieve the perfect chemical composition for hide processing. The raw materials you work with arrive as fresh animal skins, still bloody and often crawling with insects attracted to the decaying flesh. Cattle hides are your primary stock, but you also process sheep, goat, and pig skins, each requiring different techniques and presenting unique challenges. The skins arrive in various states of preservation, from relatively fresh kills to partially decomposed hides that have been transported long distances without proper preservation. Your first task is hide preparation, which involves scraping away remaining flesh and fat using specialized curved knives called fleshers. This work requires both strength and precision. Too little pressure leaves organic material that will cause the hide to rot, while too much pressure can damage the skin and reduce its value. You spend hours bent over scraping beams, your arms aching from the repetitive motion, while flies swarm around the decomposing material you're removing. The lime baths are where hides lose their hair through chemical action that would burn human skin on contact. You use long wooden paddles to manipulate hides in these caustic solutions, trying to achieve even treatment while avoiding splashes that can cause permanent injury. The lime water generates heat through chemical reactions, creating steam that carries the smell of dissolved hair and flesh throughout the workshop. Removing lime requires thorough washing, followed by treatment with solutions designed to neutralize the chemical effects and prepare hides for tanning. This process involves baiting, soaking hides in solutions containing dog or pigeon dung, which contains enzymes that break down proteins and create the proper texture for tanning. You handle these fermented excrement baths with tools designed to minimize direct contact, but the smell penetrates your clothing and skin until you carry it everywhere you go. The actual tanning process uses bark extracts rich in tannins, chemical compounds that preserve the hide and create the flexibility and durability that make leather useful. Oak bark is preferred for its high tannin content, but other tree species can substitute when oak isn't available. You prepare these solutions by grinding bark into powder and mixing it with water in carefully controlled proportions. Tanning requires weeks or months of patient work, with hides moved between vats of increasing tannin concentration until the chemical treatment penetrates completely through the material. You monitor this process daily, checking for signs of proper chemical action while watching for problems like uneven treatment or bacterial growth that can ruin entire batches of hides. The physical demands of tannery work are severe and unrelenting. Wet hides are incredibly heavy, requiring team lifting to move them between processing stations. Your hands and arms develop permanent stains from the chemicals you handle daily, and your sense of smell becomes permanently altered by constant exposure to the various odors that define your workplace. Historians still argue whether medieval tanning techniques were as sophisticated as surviving manuals suggest, but the leather goods that survive from this period demonstrate remarkable quality and durability. The armor, shoes, belts, and countless other items you produce will outlast the people who wear them, testament to the effectiveness of processes that seem primitive by modern standards. Your social position reflects society's complex relationship with essential but unpleasant work. Everyone needs leather goods, but but no one wants to live near the processes that create them. Tanneries are typically located downwind from population centers, and tannery workers often live in segregated communities where they don't contaminate others with the smells that permanently cling to their bodies and possessions. The work follows seasonal rhythms determined by animal slaughter patterns and weather conditions. Spring brings fresh hides from animals that died during winter, while autumn provides materials from livestock slaughtered before winter feeding becomes expensive. Cold weather slows chemical reactions and extends processing times, while hot weather accelerates decomposition and creates additional health hazards. Quality control requires expert knowledge that takes years to develop. You learn to assess hide quality by touch, recognizing the subtle differences in texture that indicate proper tanning. Underdeveloped leather will rot quickly, while overtanned material becomes brittle and cracks under stress. Your reputation depends on consistently producing leather that meets the demanding requirements of medieval life. The workshop hierarchy reflects skill levels and specialization. Master tanners, who understand the complex chemistry of hide processing, command respect and higher wages, while apprentices handle the most unpleasant tasks like stirring urine vats and scraping fresh hides. Your advancement through this system depends on both technical skill and the physical stamina required to survive years of exposure to toxic chemicals and revolting working conditions. You trade the stench of the tannery for the salt spray of the Mediterranean, where you're chained to a rowing bench aboard a galley ship that cuts through blue waters like a predatory fish. The massive vessel stretches nearly 200 feet in length, its bronze ram designed to punch holes in enemy ships, and you're one of 150 rowers whose synchronized strokes provide the speed and maneuverability that make naval warfare possible. The chains around your ankles aren't just restraints, they're a promise that you'll die with this ship, whether in glorious battle or in glorious storm. Your rowing bench becomes your entire world, a wooden plank barely wide enough for your body, and positioned so close to your neighbors that your shoulders touch with every stroke. The oar you'll pull weighs nearly 30 pounds and stretches 12 feet in length, requiring perfect coordination with dozens of other rowers to achieve the rhythmic precision that drives the ship forward at ramming speed. The rowing positions are arranged in tiers, with the most experienced rowers occupying the upper positions where leverage is best and working conditions are slightly more tolerable. As a new rower, whether you're a slave, captured prisoner, or volunteer motivated by desperation, you start on the lowest tier, where spray from the oar ports soaks you constantly, and the smell of bilge water mingles with human waste and sweat. Your daily routine begins before dawn with a meal of hardtack biscuits and watered wine, calculated to provide energy without creating excessive waste that would overwhelm the ship's primitive sanitation systems. The rowing master, a veteran who sets the pace and rhythm for the entire crew, calls out the stroke rate using a wooden mallet against a bronze gong that creates a hypnotic rhythm. The physical demands of galley rowing exceed almost any other form of manual labor. Each stroke requires you to lean forward until your chest nearly touches your knees, then pull back with your entire body weight while coordinating your movement with 149 other rowers. A single mistimed stroke can disrupt the entire rhythm, potentially causing oar conflicts that can break arms or ribs when wooden shafts collide. Mediterranean galley warfare depends on speed and maneuverability rather than heavy armor or artillery. Your ship can accelerate from rest to ramming speed, about 8 knots, in less than a minute when the rowing crew works at maximum effort. This burst of speed lasts only minutes before exhaustion forces a return to cruising pace. But those critical moments often determine the outcome of naval battles. The bronze ram mounted at your ship's prow weighs over a ton and can punch through enemy hulls with devastating effectiveness when delivered at full speed. You feel the massive impact through the ship's structure when ramming occurs, followed by the complex maneuvers required to back away from the sinking enemy vessel without becoming entangled in its rigging or trapped by its death throes. Combat rowing requires superhuman endurance and courage. Enemy archers rain arrows down on the rowing deck, seeking to disrupt your rhythm and reduce your ship's speed before ramming. You row through clouds of arrows while men die at benches beside you, maintaining stroke rate even as blood from wounded crewmates spatters across your oar and makes the handle slippery. The worst combat scenario involves boarding actions, where enemy marines attempt to capture your ship by overwhelming its defenders. You're chained to your bench and can't participate in the fighting, making you a helpless target for enemy soldiers who understand that killing rowers eliminates a ship's mobility. Some rowing crews are unchained during combat to allow them to defend themselves, but this creates the risk of mass desertion during critical moments. Historians still argue whether ancient galley rowers were primarily slaves or free men serving for wages, but the physical evidence suggests a mixed system that varied by time period and naval power. Archaeological discoveries of ancient shipwrecks reveal rowing benches with permanent shackle attachments, supporting accounts of chained rowers who served involuntarily. Storm conditions test both your physical endurance and the ship's structural integrity. You row against mountainous waves that can lift the entire vessel out of the water, then slam it down with enough force to crack the hull. The rhythmic rowing that seems natural in calm seas becomes a desperate struggle for survival when waves break over the rowing deck and flood the cramped spaces where you work. The social hierarchy aboard galley ships reflects both maritime tradition and the realities of coordinated physical labor. Experienced rowers who understand the complex techniques required for effective rowing earn better positions, more food, and occasionally the opportunity to advance to positions of authority over newer crew members. Your life expectancy as a galley rower depends on numerous factors beyond your control: the naval ambitions of whoever owns your ship, the skill of your captain, the effectiveness of enemy forces, and the unpredictable weather patterns that can destroy even the most seaworthy vessels. Most rowers serve for years rather than months, suggesting that survival rates might be higher than the dramatic accounts of naval warfare would suggest. Rest periods between rowing shifts provide opportunities to develop relationships with fellow rowers, sharing stories of the lives you knew before the ship and dreams of freedom that may never be realized. These conversations happen in whispers during brief meal breaks, or in the few minutes between watch changes when exhaustion doesn't immediately claim your consciousness. The rhythm of rowing becomes a form of meditation that helps you endure the monotony and physical pain. You learn to find mental peace within the repetitive motion, using the stroke rhythm as a framework for prayer, memory, or simple survival of another day, chained to a wooden bench surrounded by the endless Mediterranean Sea. You leave the galley's chains for an even more insidious form of bondage, mercury mining in the hills of Spain, where liquid metal flows like silver water through veins of rock and slowly destroys your mind while you watch. The Almaden mines stretch through hillsides that have been gouged and tunneled for centuries, their shafts descending into deposits of cinnabar, ore that contain the mercury essential for refining gold and silver throughout the Roman Empire. The mercury you extract isn't just valuable, it's magical. A metal that flows like water at room temperature and forms perfect spheres that roll across surfaces with hypnotic beauty. Ancient peoples attributed supernatural properties to this liquid metal, using it in religious ceremonies and medical treatments, unaware that its beauty masks deadly toxicity that will slowly kill everyone who works with it regularly. Your descent into the mercury mines begins with a wooden ladder that drops into shafts carved from solid rock, the walls gleaming with mineral deposits that catch torchlight like trapped stars. The air grows noticeably warmer as you descend, heated by geothermal activity that makes mercury extraction possible, but also creates working conditions that would challenge modern safety equipment. The cinnabar ore you mine appears as brilliant red crystals mixed with gray rock, beautiful enough to use as decorative stone if it weren't so valuable as mercury source. You chip away at these formations using bronze picks and wooden wedges, breaking the ore into manageable pieces that can be hauled to surface processing facilities where the real danger begins. Processing cinnabar into mercury requires heating the ore in primitive furnaces that reach temperatures sufficient to vaporize the mercury content. You tend these furnaces despite having no understanding of the toxic vapors they produce, breathing mercury-laden air that accumulates in your body tissue and gradually destroys your nervous system through mechanisms that won't be understood for another 2,000 years. The liquid mercury that flows from heated cinnabar is collected in ceramic vessels and sold to goldsmiths, alchemists, and industrial users throughout the ancient world. You handle this liquid metal with your bare hands, marveling at its unique properties while unknowingly absorbing toxic doses through your skin. The mercury feels cool and strangely alive as it flows between your fingers, forming perfect spheres that seem to have minds of their own. Working conditions in mercury mines are complicated by the metal's tendency to vaporize at relatively low temperatures. Hot summer days increase mercury vapor concentrations to levels that cause immediate symptoms, headaches, nausea, and confusion that you attribute to heat exhaustion or other causes. You don't understand that you're being slowly poisoned by invisible vapors that attack your brain and nervous system. The physical symptoms of mercury poisoning develop gradually and are often mistaken for other ailments common to dangerous occupations. You notice that your hands shake slightly when performing delicate tasks, that your memory isn't as sharp as it once was, and that you sometimes have difficulty finding the right words during conversations. These changes seem minor compared to the obvious dangers of cave-ins and equipment accidents. Psychological effects of mercury exposure are even more disturbing than physical symptoms. You begin experiencing mood swings that range from euphoria to deep depression, often triggered by minor events that wouldn't have bothered you previously. Some miners develop persistent paranoia, becoming convinced that fellow workers are plotting against them, or that supervisors are deliberately exposing them to additional dangers. The mercury trade connects your dangerous work to economic networks that span the known world. Spanish mercury travels to Roman gold mines in Gaul, Egyptian silver refineries along the Nile, and alchemist workshops in Alexandria, where scholars attempt to transmute base metals into gold. Your labor in these toxic tunnels makes possible some of the ancient world's most sophisticated metallurgical processes. Historians still argue whether ancient peoples understood mercury's toxicity, but the evidence suggests that while they recognized some dangers, they didn't fully grasp the long-term health effects of chronic exposure. Roman writers mention that mercury mine workers often suffered from tremors and mental disturbances, but they attributed these symptoms to demons or curses rather than chemical poisoning. Your work crew develops its own culture and terminology for dealing with mercury-related health problems. Experienced miners share techniques for minimizing exposure, working during cooler parts of the day, avoiding direct contact with liquid mercury when possible, and recognizing early warning signs of severe poisoning. This folk knowledge saves some lives, but can't eliminate the fundamental toxicity of your workplace. The economic incentives for mercury mining remain strong despite the obvious health risks, because the metal commands premium prices and has no viable substitutes for many industrial applications. Mine owners provide higher wages than most occupations offer, attracting workers who are willing to trade long-term health for immediate economic benefits. Sleep becomes increasingly difficult as mercury accumulates in your system. You experience vivid nightmares, night sweats, and periods of insomnia that leave you exhausted before each workday begins. Some miners report seeing things that aren't there, flickering shadows, moving shapes, or faces in the rock formations that seem to watch them work. The progression of mercury poisoning follows predictable patterns that experienced miners learn to recognize. Early symptoms include mild tremors and memory problems, while advanced cases involve severe neurological damage that can make normal work impossible. You watch older miners struggle with tasks they once performed easily, their hands shaking too badly to handle tools effectively. You leave the Mercury mines for your final occupation, tending the funeral pyres that burn through ancient nights, where death takes its most elemental form, and you find unexpected peace in the flames that consume human remains. The cremation ground spreads before you like a field of stars, dotted with wooden pyres that flicker against the darkness, while families gather to witness the final transformation of their loved ones into smoke and ash. Your work begins with pyre construction, a skilled craft that requires understanding both engineering principles and the spiritual requirements of proper cremation. You select hardwoods that burn hot and clean oak, ash, and maple when available, arranging them in precise patterns that ensure even heat distribution and complete consumption of organic material. The pyre must be large enough to accommodate an adult body while remaining structurally stable as the fire consumes its wooden foundation. The bodies you receive come from all levels of society, each wrapped in shrouds that reflect their families' economic status and religious beliefs. Wealthy Romans arrive in expensive linen, treated with aromatic oils and spices, while poor families provide simple cloth wrappings that still represent significant financial sacrifice. You treat each body with the same careful respect, understanding that death makes equals of emperors and slaves. Lighting the pyre requires both technical skill and ceremonial awareness. You use specially prepared kindling made from pine pitch and dried grass, ignited with flames taken from sacred fires that burn continuously at temple altars. The initial fire must catch quickly and burn evenly, because families are watching for signs that their loved one's spirit is being properly released from earthly bonds. The flames you tend burn with colors that tell stories: blue from aromatic oils, green from copper ornaments, yellow from natural wood combustion, and the deep orange glow that indicates complete oxidation of organic material. You learn to read these colors like text, understanding what they reveal about the fire's temperature, the materials being consumed, and the progress of the cremation process. Maintaining proper combustion requires constant attention throughout the night. You add fuel at precise intervals, ensuring the fire burns hot enough for complete cremation without becoming so intense that it damages surrounding pyres or creates dangerous conditions for mourning families. The work demands both physical stamina and emotional sensitivity to the grief of people experiencing the most profound loss possible. The sounds of cremation become a familiar symphony that accompanies your nightly work. Wood crackles and pops as moisture escapes. Cloth wrappings hiss as they ignite. And occasionally, you hear the subtle sounds of body tissues responding to intense heat. These noises aren't gruesome, they're the natural accompaniment to a process that returns human remains to their elemental components. Ancient cremation serves multiple purposes beyond simple body disposal. It prevents disease transmission, conserves burial space in crowded cities, and aligns with religious beliefs about the soul's liberation from physical constraints. Your work makes urban civilization possible by providing sanitary alternatives to burial in societies where population density would otherwise create serious public health problems. The families who gather around your pyres come seeking closure and spiritual comfort during humanity's most difficult transitions. You develop skills for providing gentle guidance to mourners, helping them understand the cremation process while respecting their emotional needs and religious beliefs. Sometimes you're the only person present who can explain what they're witnessing and assure them that their loved one is being treated with proper dignity. Your tools include long bronze rakes for managing burning materials, water vessels for controlling fires that burn too intensely, and bronze containers for collecting ashes once cremation is complete. These implements require careful maintenance because they're exposed to extreme temperatures and corrosive ash that can damage metal surfaces over time. Historians still argue whether ancient cremation practices were as widespread as surviving records suggest, but archaeological evidence confirms that cremation was a common practice throughout the Roman Empire and many other ancient civilizations. The ash deposits and fire-damaged pottery found at cremation sites validate accounts of large-scale cremation grounds that operated continuously for centuries. The physical demands of pyre attendance are less severe than many ancient occupations, but the work requires qualities that are even rarer: emotional stability, spiritual maturity, and the ability to find meaning in humanity's most fundamental transition. You develop a philosophical perspective on mortality that helps both yourself and the families you serve cope with the reality of death. Weather conditions significantly affect cremation procedures. Rain can extinguish fires or create steam that interferes with complete combustion, while high winds can spread flames to adjacent pyres or scatter ashes before they can be properly collected. You learn to read atmospheric conditions and adjust your techniques accordingly, sometimes postponing cremations until conditions improve. The social position of cremation attendants varies among different cultures, but generally involves respect mixed with superstitious avoidance. People need your services, but often feel uncomfortable around those who work so closely with death. You develop relationships primarily with other cremation workers and the priests who oversee religious aspects of funeral rites. Your work follows the natural rhythms of human mortality, with busy periods during plague outbreaks or after military campaigns, and quieter times when only natural deaths require your services. Winter brings additional challenges as families struggle to afford fuel for proper cremation, sometimes requiring you to supplement their resources to ensure complete combustion. The flames you tend become sources of meditation and spiritual reflection. Staring into fires that consume human remains while thinking about mortality, meaning, and the temporary nature of all earthly concerns creates a contemplative state that many people spend lifetimes seeking. You find wisdom in the flames that most people fear, understanding that death is simply another transformation in the endless cycle of existence. As the night deepens and your final pyre burns down to glowing coals, you rake the ashes carefully, ensuring that every trace of organic material has been consumed. The families collect these remains in ceramic urns, carrying away the last physical evidence of lives that once filled these bodies with laughter, tears, dreams, and love. You clean your tools and prepare for tomorrow's work, knowing that death will continue its ancient rhythm, and that you'll be here to tend the flames that light humanity's final journey. The ember glow fades slowly, casting dancing shadows that grow longer and softer as the fire settles into peaceful rest. Around you, the cremation ground grows quiet, except for the gentle whisper of wind through cooling ashes and the distant sound of families walking home through darkened streets. Your work is complete for another night, and you find deep satisfaction in knowing that you've helped shepherd souls across the threshold between life and whatever lies beyond, tending the sacred flames that transform earthly remains into smoke that rises toward the stars. Sleep comes easily now, with the taste of wood smoke lingering in the air, and the knowledge that tomorrow will bring new pyres, new families, and new opportunities to serve humanity's most ancient and essential needs. Rest well, knowing that even the most brutal jobs in ancient times carried dignity and meaning for those who performed them with skill and compassion.